So as the title of this video says, we are going to be painting fantasy eyes, and I will be also talking about colors, blending, concept, and more, and this will be a real time, so buckle your seat and follow me in this painting. So yeah. So here I already started off with just a quick sketch that I did before. So when it comes to doing a line art sketch, it's all up to you if you want to make it really neat and detailed and clean. But for me, it's not really that necessary because I just, the point is I want to paint, and by the end of the day, all of these lines are going to get covered anyway. So at this stage, it's up to you when it comes to the line sketch. So I already picked just a medium tone for the basic skin. So whenever I paint, I always start with a medium skin color, not the skin colors, but what I meant is just a medium color tone for the skin tone that I want. So no matter what kind of skin tone that you want, it doesn't matter how light or how dark the skin tone is supposed to be. Each kind of skin tone has its own medium color tone. So it's much better that way to start off with a medium tone. So what you have to pay attention, what you have to keep in mind is that the eyeball is not just white or gray. If you pay close attention to even your own eyeball, it actually has a tint of bluish gray to it. And of course, it can change in certain lighting, especially if you are painting a fantasy character, you can actually just play around with it. And but the point is that the eyeball is not white, and you should not just, pick a completely off-white color and just use that for the eyeball, because that is not the color for the eyeball. And besides, even though you are painting in like 2D, it's not 2D. I mean, the eyeball is in the shape of a ball, and you have to think that it is not flat, and so it definitely has some shadows and shading, and so yeah. So also for the pupil, no matter what kind of eye color for the pupil that I want, I always start with the darkest color possible, because that will make it a lot easier for me to later on add some effects, and then some effects and the color for the iris and so on. Also, I always started off, I forgot to say that I am painting this below the sketch line layer. So this is still on a different layer, and here I am just quickly putting in some shadows, just quickly. It's still a bit flat, and the shadow is not that dark. It's still kind of like a medium tone shadow. And of course, I would put that on the eyelids, and then some of the creases below the eyes, and of course the crease between the eye to the edge of like the inner eye to the edge of the inner eyebrow. So I am back on the line art sketch layer, and then I just lock that down, and as you can see, I am changing the color of the sketch line. So by changing the color of the sketch line, it will make it a lot easier for me to later on blend in things, because for example, if you have your line art sketch completely black, it will ruin the whole color for your painting if you decide to blend that line art. That's what I like to do. So before I ever merge down all layers, I will make sure that the color of the line art is at least, similar and matching to the color below it. So I just pick a kind of like a grayish color. It's not completely gray, but I choose that to like cool down the tone of the skin. So if you pay attention, the human skin is not that warm, And what I also learned is that if the shadow has warm color tones, then the highlight's supposed to be cooler tones. And also the opposite, if you decide that the shadow is supposed to be cool tones, then the highlight's supposed to be warmer tones. So since for this painting, I decided that the shadow is supposed to be just like a normal warm tone color for the skin. So that's why I decided that I need to balance the color by adding cooler tones. And yeah, so that's it. You also notice that I also added some bits of highlights on the eyelid and on the edge of the eye, like on the teardrop. And here I'm also adding just a quick eyeliner. It's not really eyeliner, but it's kind of like just a really soft but clean shadow on top of her eyelid, so that it's a lot easier for me to later add some shadows, blending, and of course the eyelashes. Also, before I forgot, I would also like to say that the reason why I don't completely zoom in on the painting is because you have to keep in mind, if you used to paint something way too like really close up, you will actually lose the balance of the whole painting. And I know that I am just painting an eye here, so it would not really matter that much, but whatever it is you're painting, don't zoom it in too much for too long. You have to balance it between zooming out and zooming in. But you could not go wrong by zooming out paintings, but you can definitely go wrong if you zoom in a painting for way too long and too much, because you will lose that sense of balance of details, and of course the balance of the whole painting, the whole color palette and everything. So keep in mind not to do that, especially when you are still in the beginning stage of your painting. I made that mistake a lot when I was a beginner years ago, and whenever I focus for too long on a certain area and I put way too much details on it, when I zoom it out, I realize that the whole painting is just off. A lot of the parts is just like not balanced, it doesn't look good, and especially with like the anatomy and the composition, everything is just off. Some of the colors are not balanced with other parts of the painting as well, and so all those times while I'm rendering things, it's not really worth it, because I had to redo everything all over again because it was just not looking great. So keep that in mind. Also in this part, I already did the eyelashes, and again, just a reminder, if you haven't watched my previous tutorial about drawing eyes, you better check that out first if you're not really sure on how to draw a realistic but pretty looking eyelashes. So finally, I am trying to decide the color of for her eyes. Now, I do want to make her eyes look kind of fantasy. We will definitely do some effects, glow, and whatever it is later on in this video. So I realized that I almost never paint a character with glowing green eyes before. I have tried brown, golden, blue, and whatever it is, but I realized that I never actually really tried to, give it a try in painting fantasy eyes with the color green. And so I decided that she should have kind of like it's not completely emerald, but an emerald green, jade looking eyes with glowing, pupil, not pupil, but more of like some glowing irises on her pupil. I think that would look really great. So you also may notice that I added some like a bit of highlight on her eye in the shape of like a tiny star, and it has the color of pink or fuchsia. And the reason why I chose that color is because it will help me to balance the color so it will not look boring. Either if it's a realistic painting or fantasy, I would suggest to choose a different color for the highlight for her eye, or whatever character that you are creating. But what I meant is that when you are choosing a color for someone's eye pupil, for the highlight of that pupil, choose a different color compared to the color of the pupil or the irises, so that at least it has something more interesting and different, and it's at least a bit more balanced than everything looks the same. It just doesn't look really that good as a whole painting. Also, at this part, I decided that I need to also cool down some parts of the area, like below her eyes, a bit on some of the creases around the eyebrow. So I choose a grayish blue tone, not too bright, not too dark, and just softly add it there around her eyes. And yeah, you can pretty much pay attention to some of the parts that I added, and I just softly lower the either you can slowly lower down the opacity of the layer, or you can softly erase that with a soft round brush eraser so that it will not be too strong, but at least it's there. You can definitely see there's a change in the color tones and the color balance and everything. So here I also added some more sharper, darker shadow for her eyelids. Now also, of course, remember that there are many kinds of eyelids, and so whichever character or kinds of people that you are painting, do pay attention if how thick you want the eyelids to be. It's all up to you, of course. Here I am also deciding that I should add just a bit more shadow there around the crease, that part between the eye to the bridge of the nose. Yeah, there should be just a bit more shadow there, so I softly add some darker tones there. Yeah, and also I also would like to mention that when it comes to painting style, it's all up to you what kind of brush that you want to use. Either you want a really texture brush or a really soft brush. It's all up to you really, because this is just a matter of style preferences. But here I find it that this brush that I'm using right now is very handy to basically paint anything. So yeah, I really love this brush. I really enjoy painting with this, so I pretty much use this brush for everything, like painting skin, color blending, hair painting, and even fabric, background, literally everything. For me, after a while using it, it works really well, and I'm very happy with this brush. Again, when it comes about color theory, or pretty much just the basic on understanding color, of course it takes a lot to practice. Because for me, it also took me years to really understand color. The basic or the fundamentals of color theory is very basic, is very simple, but trying to really understand it takes a lot of patience, a lot of practice, and definitely experiment. And so don't be afraid to try, just mix some colors based on the knowledge that you know, based on the color theory, the basic and the fundamentals that you learn, but definitely don't be afraid to experiment And of course, the more you practice, the more you do it, the more that you will become more sensitive with how your eyes see certain colors, certain color combination, and color harmony as well. So in time, you will eventually develop a strong sensitive intuition feeling on whichever area you feel like it needs to be, fixed or balance or whatever it is. You will eventually, feel that, or at least you are more aware of it. Here I am adding a bit more shadows there. Especially, it is important especially to add shadows like on the top of the eyeball, between the eyelashes to the pupil. It is important in that part, and also a bit of darker shades on the edges of the eyeball, like the edges of the white parts of the eye. It is important to add just a bit of soft shadows there. But then again, do remember, this all can change if you have a certain lighting style, or especially if it is a fantasy glowing eyes. But whatever it is, this is just a basic flat fantasy eyes painting style. Anything can change. If you change the color of the environment, the color of your character design itself, and the source of the highlight, what kind of colors that you want the lighting, the source light to be, everything can change. So just keep in mind that you do need to know about color theory, color harmony, understanding, balancing colors and everything. It's all important. So when it comes about painting, it is a lot about colors and value as well. Here I finally decided to add a glowing effects by adding a new layer, and I set that layer to have that color dodge filter. I love color dodge so much because it really helps to intensify some colors and make it look like it's really glowing. So I decided to add that. So, for her eyes, since this whole mini tutorial is about painting fantasy eyes. Here I use it's not really a star brush, but it has 3 dots, and I just set that to it has a scattering effect on the brush setting, and I just quickly put that around, especially where the highlight is around the eyes, like on the top and below of the eyebrow tail, that eyebrow bone, and also the cheekbones. I like to use some kind of a sparkling effect, as if her skin on that part is glowing or sparkling. So yeah. Also, oh gosh, how could I forget this? I also forgot to mention that it doesn't matter what kind of if you want to paint male eyes or female eyes, it doesn't matter. It's all the same. But of course, generally, the difference is that female eyes is more open, it's more rounded, it's bigger, while male eyes has a more sharper edge to it, and it's a bit more close, and it has a bit of a square shape to it compared to female. Pretty much what I observed, that's the only difference. When it comes to the eyebrow shape and how long the eyelashes that you want to put, that is completely to your own character design, and of course self-preference style or look. It doesn't really matter, because anyone can have thick or thin eyebrows, anyone can have really full, long, thick eyelashes, so it doesn't really matter. At this stage, I am really happy that I decided to give a really cool blue eyeliner, because I think that really complements with the color of, the eyes. So I think since this character has really, sharp, vibrant, bold colors, I would also give just a quick tip again about balancing colors, or at least understanding colors. So here I do want that the majority of the color of the eye and also the makeup around it supposed to be cold, because I will admit it, I'll be honest that I am very much into cold colors. I love working with cold colors a lot, or with cooler tones. That's just my own style. And of course, there's nothing wrong in experimenting and trying different things. But for now, I really want everything, except the skin tone, like the eyes and the makeup. What I meant is that I wanted to have cool tones. But if you think cool tones by just thinking blue, then if everything is blue, then it would be boring, because there's no like diversity in it. So to balance that, since again, like the eye being green, I decided to balance the highlight by choosing a pink or fuchsia for the that small highlight on her pupil. And for the eyeliner makeup, eyeliner makeup, I decided to choose blue. So of course you can be as creative as you want it to be, and also even the shape of the highlight for her pupil, or for your character's pupil, it doesn't matter. You can even make that highlight has like heart shape, star, triangle even. It can be literally anything. You can just be as creative as you want it to be. Just remember, if you're painting a fantasy character or a fantasy concept art design, just go crazy with it. There's no rules or limit. But of course there are certain rules based on the basic fundamental theories about design, about color, about shape, stuff like that. There is definitely the basic rules, basic fundamental theory understanding that you do need to still keep in mind and bring that with you even when you design a fantasy character. If you have no idea about any fundamentals, any basic theory, and you want to just immediately jump in, create a fantasy character, believe me, you're not gonna finish that, and you might as well end up with something looking really messy, and it would just totally not make sense. It will totally not be balanced, and it's just not a really good design. I made that mistake as well when I was a beginner. Of course, we all make mistakes, but it's good thing because we learn from it. It's part of our lesson and learning and growing as an artist. So whenever you feel like it's so hard for you to design a fantasy character, don't worry too much about it. Every time you practice, you progress and you improve. So there's nothing wrong with that. And I guess what I'm saying is just be patient. I know that it is quite difficult, probably really difficult for some people, but we all started from learning the basic fundamental things. So it's all up to you about how you really want to practice and how much you want to spend hours each day that you want to contribute yourself to your own passion, to your art and skill and so forth. Also, another tip is that I do have planned, I think I will definitely make another video sometime with a much more detailed, longer video about designing fantasy character. And I do plan to talk a lot there about concept art, about designing your fantasy character, story, and stuff like that. So another thing before I also forgot is that I would also like to give just a small, quick tip about designing a fantasy character. If you want to design a full detailed fantasy character that has an interesting story, personality, or concept behind it, then don't just randomly choose color for their character. Don't just, for example, let's say that you are creating a magical fantasy creature or character that live in the forest. Let's say probably maybe it's a fairy, elf, or maybe a pixie, and they live a very beautiful natural life in in the garden or like in a forest. It would not just make sense if their eyes is like red or yellow because it would just be too much. It would be just too intense, and they would literally not fit in there unless you do have a specific reason why they are the way they are, why they are designed that way. It's definitely okay. But let's say that you want to create a race of elf or fairy that live in a very beautiful full of flowers, garden and forest. It would just not make sense if their eyes are glowing red. And also the same, for example, if you are creating a fairy or a race of elf that live in the volcanic environment, it would just not make sense if you give them like blue eyes or green eyes, because that would be just way too different and it would just not make sense. Even when you want to create a fantasy character, you have to balance with their environment, where they came from, and things like that. But again, do know that that is just like the basic understanding of creating a story or like a concept art for your fantasy character. You definitely can break some rules as long as you know the basic rule. Especially if you are creating your own world. I mean, there's no rule to it. But of course, no matter how highly fantasy it is, at least make some things still realistic and make sense in a very natural way. Unless, again, like I said before, if you do have a specific reason why that certain particular character is very different from the rest, then of course you can make that and eventually develop the story further so that it would not be too weird or too different, and it would not be like way too misunderstood, I suppose. I mean, this is just about the basic of concept art and like creating a story with your character. If you are planning to create maybe like a webcomic or even your own book or whatever it is, like a graphic novel, just giving a quick tip about that. Back again to the actual video. Actually, I am painting in the eyebrows and I'm not adding too much detail. So my style is definitely, you can already notice, it is still a semi-realism style. I would not go too hyper realistic with any of my painting. So if you want to create a really realistic, detailed looking eyebrow, then sure, go ahead, definitely do that if you like it. But remember, also balance the detail between like everything, like the whole painting. Make sure that everything is balanced and not too awfully different. At this part, I'm not really adding any more like complicated details or colors. I pretty much just trying to blend in things, trying to make things look more neat at least. And also, even up till this point, you may also realize that I haven't zoomed in the eye completely close, like a close-up painting. I still have it pretty zoomed out because still, for me, it's not really that necessary to zoom it in. Because yeah, I noticed that every time I zoom it in too much in the past, I would always make mistakes, and I would definitely regret that because I have to redo everything all over again. And I felt like, oh no, I just wasted time, creating on a progress when it's just not going well enough, and I have to eventually delete some things. So yeah, it's pretty heartbreaking. So ever since I started to change my system, my method, and pretty much like the basic progress of how I do my art, I improve really, really quickly and really differently. And I feel like my painting process is a lot smoother than before, and I definitely spend less time fixing things or fixing mistakes, So instead of that, now I feel like I can completely just move on, keep on moving forward with painting, adding details, color blending, stuff like that, instead of spending way too much time trying to fix things. So I finally decided that it's time to add more details, but since the painting looks a bit too soft, I duplicated that layer and then go to the menu that I just did before and choose high pass. So that grayish thing before, that happened because I set that filter to high pass, and then that layer I set that again. I set the filter of that high pass layer to you can choose either overlay, soft light, or hard light. You can just go, if you didn't really notice that, I'm sorry if it was a bit too quick of that process, but you can just keep going back and see what I just did there. Here I decided to also balance the color a bit, and whenever I'm sure with balancing colors and shadows, brightness, or whatever it is, I would of course duplicate a layer before changing anything, just to always have some backup with me. And yeah, just to make sure that everything looks fine, and then I will merge down the layer again. It is important to always duplicate your main layer before you make any changes. You don't want any regret whenever you want to change or you make some progress, and then you realize that apparently the progress before you did anything was much better than what you just did before, and you realize that you cannot go back because you already changed things on the same layer. So definitely whenever you want to create some changes, do duplicate that layer first, so whenever things go wrong you can always go back and not to be scared if you're going to lose everything. I actually noticed that I feel like in the past I would do a much more realistic, highly detailed looking eye because I was so used to in doing portraits. But over the past time, I felt really bored to just do portraits. So I would just like to say that currently I am more into full illustration instead of just focusing on portrait or like just the eye. I am now trying to experiment more in storytelling, creating an illustration that is more, alive and like it has more action and dynamic to it. So since I do that, I would normally, from now, it has been like several times that I haven't really focused much on just portrait. So in this current time, I am used to create illustration where my main focus, like my character, is shown from the head to probably like the waist or maybe the thigh, or at least sometimes towards the knees area. So since I do that, I would definitely not put too much details on their faces since it's not that important anyway. It's not going to be seen. And I think that's the reason why I felt like, yeah, I do love painting eyes, especially eyes. Definitely it's a feature that I love the most compared to any other parts of the faces whenever I'm painting. But I do realize that in the past I used to do a very realistic looking eye, but now as time goes by, I am much more experimental with colors, with shapes, design and everything, and of course not paying too much attention on not paying too much attention on the details. But again, instead of that, I focus more like the whole thing, the whole painting as like one object or like one main focus, instead of every single thing separated into parts that I need to pay too much focus on with like certain details or stuff like that. So here I am adding some like soft bits of highlights and color blending around the wet area, the teardrop and the wet lines of the eye. It is important to add highlights there. It is very important because, the eye is, it's wet, definitely. It's glossy and it's wet. So you might as well want to add some highlights here and there, not too much, of course, and don't add it like literally everywhere, but add just bits of highlights, and just softly a bit of tiny highlights here and there. You can pay attention on what I'm doing here and also create that like a glossy effect on the eyeball, because again, the eyeball is round, it's a ball, it's not flat, and it's wet and glossy. So pay attention to that, because sometimes you may not really realize it, since we're painting two-dimensionally, but you also have to think it as if it's still 3D, and you have to think of the form as a 3D object, and that there should be shadows and highlight so it will not look flat. When it comes to drawing or painting the eyelashes, again, of course, it's all up to you for your own self-preference, however thick or however long, even whatever, style that you want the eyelashes to be. If you want it to look really thick or you want it to look natural, it's all up to you, of course. But the tip here is that if you want to make them look natural, don't make them look too sharp. So that's why whenever I whenever I draw or paint eyelashes, I would do that in a different layer so I can then softly erase the edges of the eyelashes with a soft round brush eraser, so at least that the tip of the eyelashes would look soft and more natural and not way too strong or too sharp. And again, whenever I'm sure with how it looks, I will merge that layer down. It can be scary if you are so used to work in lots of layers. Not that there's anything wrong with it, of course not. That is just, whichever way that or progress that we all have. So there's nothing wrong with that. But over the time, I found that working on like really small amount of layers, especially if it's only like one layer, it actually gives me the freedom to fix things more naturally and make it look more naturally. I notice whenever I have way too many layers on my painting, I don't know, but if I try to compare the difference, like the difference of the result, whenever I have too many layers on my painting, it actually look really stiff, unnatural, and as if like it's not naturally blending together. It looks as if I just suddenly add something new on top of the layer and add another random thing on top of the layer. I don't know, for me it just feels unnatural, and sometimes some edges it feels like it's not natural. So that's why I prefer to do things normally, as if like I'm painting traditionally. So yeah, as if like if I'm painting with acrylic or oil painting, I like that feeling so much. So I prefer to do it that way. Here, since again this is a fantasy eye tutorial, I decided to add some really cute sparkly star kind of a brush, and to just add that on, just tiny bits of sparkly stuff on the eyelashes. And again, so that this effect would not be way too sharp, I just softly erase that, just a little bit softly to erase it with a soft round brush. Anyway, we are coming to the end of this mini tutorial. I hope that this whole tutorial is very clear, easily understandable, and helpful to you. I really hope that you find this helpful or useful, and you can practice and interpret it in your own style, and to keep on experimenting. And yeah, don't be afraid to experiment with things. If you want to keep update with me, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. I also do traditional art. There I show you even more understanding about colors and blending. Traditional and digital works perfectly well together. So if you're interested in that, then check out my channel. Also, check out and possibly follow my art blogs like Instagram, Tumblr, and DeviantArt. So I will see you soon with more painting videos, tutorials, and so forth.